I want to start by naming something that a lot of people experience early in their career, but almost no one talks about directly. That feeling that you're behind, not behind in a dramatic way, not failing, just slightly out of step. Like everyone else understands something you don't, or like conversations move on before you fully caught up. Like you're doing the work, but you're never totally sure whether you're doing it right. Most people interpret that feedback as feeling incompetent. They assume it means they're missing something obvious, or that they're not cut out for this, or maybe that they're already falling behind, even if no one has said that part out loud. What I want to tell you up front is this: that feeling is not a personal failure, it's structural. And if no one names it for you, it's very easy to misread what's actually happening. You're listening to The Practice of Practice, a podcast for architects, designers, and emerging professionals navigating the gap between school and real work. We focus on the realities most people only learn through experience: workflow, judgment, responsibility, and time. It's not theory, it's practice. Early in my career, I assumed that confusion meant I hadn't earned the clarity yet. If instructions I got felt vague, I figured I wasn't trusted with more detail. If feedback was more indirect, I assumed I hadn't reached a level where people would be straightforward with me. If expectations weren't completely spelled out, I thought that was because I was supposed to already know them. So I compensated the way most people do. I worked harder, I overprepared, and I tried to fill the gaps myself. And from the outside, it probably looked fine. But from the inside, it felt more like I was constantly guessing what the job actually was. What I didn't understand yet was that I had moved from a system that teaches output into one that teaches judgment and teaches it indirectly. No one explains that transition. And because no one explains it, I assumed the problem was me. Take school. School is built around output. Even when it's subjective, the structure is visible. You know what the assignment is, you know when you're done, and you know when something is considered good or not. There are critiques, rubrics, instructors, clear milestones. You might disagree with the feedback that you get, but at least you understand the rules of the game. Practice doesn't work that way. Practice is not organized around output. It's organized more around judgment. And judgment is rarely taught directly. It's learned through exposure, through repetition, through watching decisions play out over time. That difference is where most early career anxiety comes from. Not because people suddenly become less capable, but because the teaching method quietly changes. Here's what it looks like in real life. You're given a task that sounds simple. Something like take a first pass or clean this up. Look into this for me. Or put something together for this meeting. On the surface, it feels like it's straightforward. But immediately your brain fills in unanswered questions. You think, how polished does this need to be? Or how much time should I spend on it? Is this something that's more exploratory? Is it the final project? What happens if I miss something? Those questions don't mean you're insecure. They mean that the context is missing. And early in practice, missing context is the norm. It's not the exception. The problem here is that most people don't realize that. So instead of recognizing the gap as structural, they internalize it. They assume that their confusion equals that they're falling behind. There's a really common version of this that shows up early in practice, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. Someone's told to take a first pass at this, and that's it. They don't have any qualifiers, no other explanation, and immediately their brain goes into overdrive. Is this supposed to be loose or polished? Am I setting direction or just exploring? How much time is reasonable here? What happens if I miss something obvious? None of those questions are wrong. What's wrong is the assumption that there's a single correct answer you're supposed to know already, because first pass doesn't mean the same thing in every context. Sometimes it means Give me something messy so we can react. Or I want to see if you understand the problem. Or we need to move this forward and I don't have time to spell everything out. Early on, people hear first pass and treat it like a test. So they overpolish it. They spend hours refining something that's supposed to be directional, and they hide the uncertainty instead of surfacing it. And then they're confused when the response is muted or corrective. From their side, it feels like a mismatch. From the other side, it looks like effort applied at the wrong level. Again, that's not incompetence. It's missing context. And the fastest way to fix it is not working harder. It's asking one simple clarifying question early enough that actually helps. What's a good first pass look like here? That question doesn't make you look inexperienced. It makes you look more calibrated. This is the first reorientation I want you to take seriously. Struggling early does not mean you're behind. It just usually means you don't have enough context yet. Maybe you don't have enough context about the project. Maybe you don't have enough context about the office. Maybe you don't have enough context about what actually matters in this moment. And context is not something you can just manufacture through effort. It only comes with time and exposure. One of the biggest mistakes people make early on is treating every moment of uncertainty as something they should have already figured out. They think, oh, if I were good at this, this would feel clearer. But clarity in practice doesn't come from ability. It comes from pattern recognition, from seeing the same situation enough times to know usually what matters and what doesn't. No one starts with that. Everyone just earns it slowly. And until you've earned it, things are going to feel vague in ways that are uncomfortable. Again, that doesn't mean you're failing. It just means you're early. And this is why working harder doesn't always fix that feeling. Yeah, you can stay later. Yeah, you can refine more. You can try to anticipate everything. But that doesn't replace context. In fact, sometimes it makes the confusion worse because you're putting a lot of energy into decisions that don't actually carry much weight. And when the feedback doesn't match the effort, you feel even more off balance. That disconnect is not a signal to try harder. It's a signal that you're optimizing without orientation. The last pattern I want to name here is one that catches a lot of people. A lot of capable people. When things feel unclear, they respond by working harder. They put in more hours, or they're checking things more, they're trying to refine more. And on the surface, yeah, that looks responsible, but I've seen this backfire more times than I can count. People invest deeply in decisions that were never meant to carry that much weight. They exhaust themselves trying to be right in moments that were supposed to be more exploratory. And then when the work inevitably changes, it feels personal, almost like all that effort was ignored. But what's actually happening is the effort's being applied before orientation. They're optimizing without knowing what's being optimized for. That's why working harder doesn't always produce clarity. Clarity comes from understanding what kind of decision you're making. Again, is this provisional or final? Is it directional? Or is it confirming something? Is it about accuracy or is it about momentum? Those decisions are invisible early on, so people assume every decision matters equally. They don't. And learning which ones matter is a judgment skill, not a work ethic issue. Once you start seeing that, a lot of early anxiety softens. Not because the work gets easier, but it starts making more sense. Another reason this gets misinterpreted is that practice rarely tells you explicitly when you're doing fine. There isn't constant reassurance. Feedback is selective. Sometimes it's minimal. Sometimes it's indirect. Silence is what's common. Early on, silence feels loaded. You assume it means something negative. Most of the time, it doesn't. Most of the time, it just means nothing urgent happened. But without this context, silence becomes a story. And the story people tell themselves is usually harsher than reality. Another place this confusion shows up a lot is in the feedback, or what feels like a lack of it. Early on, people expect feedback to be comprehensive. They expect someone to tell them what worked, what didn't, and why. But practice rarely works that way. Again, feedback's normally selective. People comment on the things that matter most in that moment and they let the rest ride. But if you don't have context, that selectivity feels loaded. You think, they didn't mention this. Does that mean it's wrong? Or they only commented on one thing. Should I be worried? Or even worse, that silence gets interpreted as disappointment. Most of the time, silence just means nothing urgent happened. No decision was blocked. No risk was introduced. Nothing required immediate correction. But early in your career, it's very easy to treat silence as judgment. That's where people start spiraling. They revise things that didn't need revision, or they second-guess decisions that were fine. They burn energy trying to read between lines that aren't actually there. And it's not insecurity. It's missing context about how feedback actually functions in practice. Feedback's not a running evaluation. It's a directional signal. And until you understand that, it's very easy to imagine evaluation happening constantly when it usually isn't. And that's something that we'll unpack much more in one of the next episodes. For now, I just want to stay with this idea of disorientation because it's the foundation for everything else. If you assume confusion means incompetence, you'll spend your early career trying to hide uncertainty. You'll avoid asking questions, you'll over-polish things, and you'll guess instead of getting clarity. That doesn't make you stronger. It makes practice harder than it needs to be. If instead you understand confusion as missing context, your posture changes. You stop treating that uncertainty as one of your flaws and you start treating it as its own information. You ask better questions. You start to listen for patterns and you calibrate and adapt faster. Not because you suddenly know more, but because you're interpreting signals more accurately. This episode isn't here to make you feel better. It's here to make you more oriented. And there's a difference there. Confidence that isn't grounded in context is fragile. Orientation is steadier. It gives you a way to make sense of what you're experiencing without jumping to conclusions about your ability. So if you're early in your career and things feel harder than you expected, here's the takeaway I need you to sit with. You're probably not behind. You're probably just early in a system that doesn't explain itself. That doesn't mean you relax. It means you recalibrate how you interpret what's happening around you. This season is about making those invisible dynamics visible. Not so you can game them, not so you can perform better, but so you stop misreading normal practice signals as personal shortcomings. In the next episode, we're going to build directly on this. We'll talk about what you're actually being evaluated on, why most people imagine judgment happening in ways that rarely does. Because once you understand that, a lot of early anxiety loses its grip. And that's where trust starts to replace performance. And that's where the practice begins to feel navigable instead of challenging and opaque. The practice of architecture is not intuitive, but it is learnable. So don't worry, we'll keep building from here.